Well, before we get going, let's quickly have a look at what we'll be covering in this section and what skills you're going to be learning. This section is focused in getting you properly set up with Final Cut Pro by teaching you some of the key concepts and skills that will help you become professional and efficient. To introduce these concepts, we'll be creating two projects, MTB and Road Trip. Now, we're going to provide you with all the media so that you can just follow along as we cover the key concepts, such as the basic process you should follow when creating the new projects. Also, we'll be looking at some of Final Cut Pro's primary tools, and we'll be learning what they can do for us too. And lastly, we'll be looking at some of the most important buttons and options so you are really fully familiar with the Final Cut Pro interface. Now, this section will provide you with fundamental knowledge that's really going to stand you in good stead for the rest of the course. So let's take a look at what we're going to do in this section. It's time to get going with our first project and put some of the knowledge that we've learned in the previous section into practice. That said, as we discussed in the lecture on libraries, generally when you are working on a new project, you want to create a new library, as this will minimize the usage of system resources, as Final Cut Pro won't need to load each particular Final Cut Pro project every time you open the library. But paradoxically, for these two projects we are working on, we will work in one library. This is because both the projects are very small and won't contain much media, so all the media will be housed in one event instead of in multiple events. So we can finally create our new library. And quite similarly, if you can remember from the previous lessons, all you need to do is go to the top where it says File, go to New, and then Library. We'll simply call this Library Projects, as this is where we will store all our smaller projects, but you can call it whatever you like. If you do have an external hard drive, a suggestion is that you plug it in and store your library there, as it'll take a lot of pressure off your Mac storage later, as we've mentioned in a previous lesson. The next thing we'll do is create a new folder, and we'll call this FCP Course Projects, as we will house all the media in this folder. Now simply hit save, and your new library should be created. Now, at the moment, there isn't much to see besides the generated event, which is just named after the current date. For our two projects that we're going to be doing, Road Trip and MTB, we can rename the generated event to Road Trip Event. And for the Final Cut Pro project, we'll call it Road Trip. Next, we can create a new event. This time we can call it MTB Event. Now, by right-clicking on the event, we can create a new Final Cut Pro project. And this time we'll call it MTB. I know, very creative. Sometimes it's just best to just go with what's simple, because then you can figure out where everything is stored. And that's all there is to do for now. Quite simply, we have created a library, which we stored in its own folder on the hard drive, and then we created two events and two corresponding projects. But now basically we're ready. We essentially have the capsule or the housing, which is going to be ready for all the media that we are going to place in it. In the next lesson, we'll look at downloading and importing the media so that you can follow along and join in the exciting process as we begin editing our project. In this lesson, we're downloading and importing our media to the events, and we'll also look at the various ways in which you can import media. As we said in this course, we believe the best way to learn is by being an active learner. So to help you follow along, we're going to be providing you with the resources which you can download. Now, if you want to use your own footage, you certainly can do that too. It just might be a little bit more difficult to follow along at times. And if you really are the sort of passive person and you don't really want to do the activity, that's fine too. But we still highly suggest that you do follow along and participate for at least one or two of our main projects. So let's get started by downloading the relevant media. Now that we have our source videos downloaded, the first thing we want to do is move them over to our Final Cut Pro project file. This way we can have all of the media in the same place. Opening Final Cut Pro, we can now look at the different ways in which we can import this media into their corresponding events. Firstly, if you look at the top left corner, you'll see an arrow pointing down. If you click this arrow, it'll open a new window, which is essentially a file selector. And here you can find your media from different locations such as an external hard drive or your computer. This import window is useful if you change specific media settings for a particular project. If you look to the side, you will see there are a bunch of things that you can do when importing media, like adding it to a new event, or changing its keyword, which is the same, or the name it has when it's imported. You can also analyze and adjust the imported media's video and audio settings, or even create proxy media. We'll look at some of these more complex topics in the advanced section of this course. One thing we will discuss in this first section is where it says copy to library or copy to hard drive, depending on if the event's library is stored on an external hard drive or not. If we select copy to library or hard drive, this means that Final Cut Pro will create a copy of the media and store it either in the library or as a folder in your external hard drive. Now, generally, this is not the way we like doing things. Instead of letting Final Cut Pro create a copy of the file, leave the files in place. This means that there won't be a duplicate of every file. However, if you are nervous that you might lose the original files, then yes, well, by all means, let Final Cut Pro create a copy, but realize you're going to have lots of extra files being stored. So I'll instead leave the files where they are, as they are with the library, and I know I won't lose or delete them. Okay, so now we can see we have our files imported, and Final Cut Pro has even created keyword collections, which is just the name of the folder. But we'll also look at keyword collections in the future. For now, you should be able to find your imported media by clicking here or by clicking on the event. Now we can import our media for our other project. For this project, we'll import the media in a different way, and a faster way. And this is simply by dragging and dropping from Finder. And this is generally the way you will find that we use on most occasions. So going to our Finder, we can quite simply drag the folder over to the MTB event. Here you'll notice a small plus icon over the media. This is because Final Cut Pro is trying to create a copy of the media. Now, to stop this, you can simply hold down the Option key. Now you should have the road trip media imported, and if you click on the event, you should see all the media you dragged over, as well as the road trip project. So that's importing media. The two different ways you can go about doing it is actually very simple, but you should take these few extra steps that we've showed you as you want to try and control the amount of computer storage that you're using, because you're going to thank us for that in the long run. So at this point, we've been looking at a lot of the basics of Final Cut Pro, and now we're ready to get to the really more interesting, exciting stuff. In the previous lesson, we imported all of the footage that we're going to be working with into their respective events. At this point, we are ready to start getting really practical by bringing our media down to the timeline to begin the editing process. So what we want to do now is take some of our clips and start working with them. To begin the editing process, all you need to do is move over to the project you want to work on. So in our case, we're going to work on the road trip project. So click on the road trip, then double click on the road trip project. And for the moment of truth, to bring the media to the timeline, all we need to do is to drag it over to the timeline and drop. As simple as that. We can grab another clip and bring it over the timeline by doing the same thing, drag and drop. And as you drop it, you will start building your timeline. And in this timeline, this is where the editing happens. This is where your footage comes together and how you start creating your movie or your video. One thing we will quickly point out is that if we move over to the MTB project and import media into the timeline, you will see that some of these have audio waves at the bottom of the media thumbnail. And as for our other footage in the road trip project, there are no audio waves. And this is simply because the stock footage that we've used doesn't have audio embedded like our mountain bike clips do. Now, you may also have noticed, which we know that you super are observant, when you click on one of your clips, Final Cut Pro brings up a preview window. And if you move your mouse over this area, you can scrub through the selected video. This is really just a quick way that you can easily look at the footage to get the part that you want. And then if you only need a selected range from a clip, all you need to do is click and drag and then move the selected footage over to the timeline. Now that we have a few clips on the timeline, all we need to do now is hit space. And there you have it, an extreme rough cut of your final video production. So really just simply moving the clips from the media section to the timeline, and we really have started building our final movie. But obviously there's still a lot more to learn and a lot more exciting things to do before we get to the stage where we really have our movie. But we suggested you start getting to know this area and what we talked about here by moving some of your clips over to the timeline area. Even maybe create a small sequence of clips to familiarize yourself, because there's lots more exciting stuff to do. So enjoy as we're getting one step closer to building our movies in Final Cut Pro.